And today's topic is end-of-life options. We're asking, should we be able to legally choose the time of our death? And topics that are associated with that, such as medical-assisted death. Should that be legally available in California? And what are the moral implications of allowing it? And should anything be done to stop it? So we'd love to hear your views, pro or con, because it's an important topic. And really, this show was a great important topic for my late partner, Donna Sheehan. Some of you knew her. And she chose the time of her death herself. And it was, unfortunately, because it's not legal to do it and to have anyone assisting, it was done sort of undercover while I was gone from the house, which in places like Oregon, Maine, there are five states around the country that allow medical assistance in dying, death with dignity, and they're allowed to have friends and family around them as they move on, which is, to me, is a wonderful thing. So we'd like to know what your thoughts are about this, and, do you have any objections on the concept itself? Do you have any questions about how it's accomplished or what the procedure might be?
Charlie, you're on the air. Can you hear us?
Oh, good. Yes, I'm free there. That works for me. Anyway, I just wanted to first call up and give your program some support. We are listening. And
yay!
As far as the topic goes, it is a topic for lots of discussion, of course. As a San Francisco native, I was really proud of the fact that the city paid to have a suicide barrier put up on the bridge, because I think if somebody is depressed, and that's a terrible feeling, some people think they have to take themselves out in order to stop the depression. I'm not so sure that officially I would support people taking their own lives with medical help, but I sort of feel like all the issues that Kevorkian dealt with, he seemed to be a very dignified, compassionate man. And he seemed to deal with people that really, saw no end in sight of their pain and suffering and increased pain and suffering. So I think his issues were legitimate. And, it's interesting because the other side of this is that there are people that want to make a woman grow something inside her body legally. So anyway, I just wanted to chime in and sort of put those little rascals out there and see who responds. Do you want to the line, or?
Thank you, Charlie. That's great. And, it's like if you have a right to life, is there a right to death, right?
Yeah, and I also have to say that as a persnickety hippie, I am a little bit suspicious of, one's life from the time they're born, and barcoded and given a social security number and everything. Kind of being controlled by the system. That's something, once again, that has to be looked at from all sides and a little bit deeper. But, that's kind of what's cha-chaing through my cranium about your subject.
Hey, Charlie, this is Bernie. I just want to say thank you so much for being our first caller. As Paul has said, our main goal here with this show is to involve the community in calling in. And you were right here for us, first call in. Thanks so much.
Well, as a founding member of the station, watching it grow and be a baby and buying it diapers, and now it's kind of a teenager, this is historical. People have kicked around the idea about call-in shows for all different kinds of things, but you all did it, so thank you very much, and I support you fully.
Thank you, Charlie. That's great. So, thank you. The California legislature, they're having hearings on a end-of-life options act. similar to Oregon's law, which has been in place for 18 years, and that is right now going through the legislature, hopefully coming up for a vote in September. And we have another caller. Yippee.
Hi, Vicki, are you there?
Hi.
You're on the air.
I am indeed. Thank you very much. When I first heard about this program, it prompted me to get out my old copy of Derek Humphreys' book, Let Me Die Before I Wake. And I find it particularly, well, I don't know if irony is the right word to use, but when we talk about euthanasia, it comes from the two Greek words, eu meaning good, and thanatos meaning death.
Uh-huh.
And if you ask most people what they would like for the end of life, they would say to you, a good death, dying at home in bed with the people that I love around me. And yet we seem unable to translate this into the current thinking of saving life at all cost. And so we have to come to a different realization of what end of life means. It's a very difficult thing, but I think there's a great deal of difference between a conscious decision because of external factors and something like jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge.
Right.
There's different sorts of suicide. And a good death is definitely, I wouldn't consider that to be that. A good death is something that all of us would embrace. Anyway, there's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. That was beautifully said. And so the law coming up would make the differentiate between sort of spur of the moment depressive reaction to depression by committing suicide, jumping off the bridge, and the part of the law would be that you're in sort of sound mind, and that it wasn't a spur of the moment decision. It would require at least 2 physicians' diagnoses of your being a terminal patient, and
Susan, you're on the air now. Hello?
Bernie and Mr. Paul and Raven. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. This is a great topic. I, interestingly, have just completed reading Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's final book, The Wheel of Life. And as the previous caller stated, this is what Kubler-Ross has in her book. She says that the ideal death, in her opinion, from all of her research, was to die at home surrounded by family. And she was absolutely correct on that. And the second thing I want to say is, all of this minutia about legalities and, having the right to do this, and the bottom line is, if you really want to take your life, who is going to stop you? I feel that if I am capable of it at any point from here on, and for whatever reason I am finished with this aspect of my being, so to speak, I will definitely do it my way.
Susan, I'm going to put you down here because you're a noisy line, but we're going to respond to what you said, so please listen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for calling in. It's wonderful. So, Susan's, yes, that was wonderful. Who's going to stop you? Well, so, when it comes down to it, nobody can be stopped from doing it because there are so many ways to do it. And the what's being put through the California legislature right now would be a law that actually allows doctors to prescribe and even attend the end of life, which is something that is not allowed right now, certainly. And, of course, some doctors have great issues with that because, first do no harm, right, is what they always say. And who are they to... They don't feel it's their role to be assisting in death. So.
Don't sometimes doctors look for you to sort of feel that there's some hope somewhere? In other words, people are always asking our medicine, well, is there no hope? Or they're looking for something. And doctors kind of, I think, want to not say there's nothing. So they talk about what procedures are underway, what studies are underway. And it kind of gives a false hope, doesn't it, to people?
Well, false hope. I mean, there's always the hope that some cure is going to be found for whatever you have, right? I mean, if you hang around for 6 months, maybe they'll discover a cure for ALS or something, you know. Oh, the California Medical Association has actually come out and said they have no objections to this law that's being introduced into California, which is a huge thing. The medical association that is opposed to it, ironically enough, is the California Association of Oncology. Well, in my cynical way, I might say that was the cancer trade, you know.
Well, that's a really tough question on when you sort of give up on the chemotherapy and give up on the radiation and all of the possibilities that exist and say, I'm just going to accept that, you know, I'm near the end. And, you know, I've seen firsthand now how that kind of switch to palliative care is a big relief to the patient and to the family. Everyone now gets more real about what can we talk about rather than this hope in that the next thing's going to cure.
Right. Well, and what's, you know, actually wonderful in California is if you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, meaning that you have 6 months or less to live, there is always hospice available. And there is palliative care available, meaning that palliative care, basically they're knocking you out with pain-killing drugs and making sure you're not in pain, even if that means you're lying in bed sort of comatose. But so there is hospice available for terminal patients, and the laws that are going through are basically for terminal patients, which in Donna's case was still a problem because she was not diagnosed as terminal. She had a wasting neurodegenerative disease, but she was not given 6 months or less to live, so could not apply for hospice. But we could see the deterioration in her quality of life and the pain level that she was suffering. And so in her case, it was a well thought out, well discussed. We talked about it for years about when the time would come. So that, when it's not a flash in the pan, when it's not that kind of spur of the moment decision, my point of view, which is.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, and congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And for your new show, I think it's terrific.
Thanks.
And well, I happen to be a nurse practitioner and have, paid my dues being a bedside nurse years ago. And I can tell you, it does not surprise me about the CMA's or the AMA's view on physician-assisted suicide, because it's actually been done for years in the hospital. They just turn up the morphine drip.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it's always been hush-hush. Obviously for legal reasons, but, it's always been done in a tasteful way. Somebody is in a severe amount of pain and or very elderly. The end is clear, and they're on the morphine drip, and things are discussed, and it's turned up. And they die peacefully and painlessly.
Right.
And another thing I'd like to bring up is that, just to stress to everybody, put it in your will, put it in your trust, put it in your medical chart if you make sure in the hospital or at your doctor's or healthcare provider's office's chart how you want to go.
Yes.
And so forth. And yes, I agree that ideally it would be for me, it would be at home, surrounded by my friends and family, and I would have control.
Yes, exactly. So since we always sort of suspect that it's always been done, do you feel there's a need for legislation to do this, or are the needs taken care of?
I haven't fully fully thought that out. Like Susan said, we're sitting here in the car about to go into the station house for breakfast, but of course we wanted to support you.
Thank you.
I haven't fully thought that out yet, but again, as someone else stressed and Charlie stressed, I mean, it's a little different if somebody perhaps jumps off from the Golden Gate Bridge. And I mean, people. That's somebody that's desperate, that may leave a lot of pain behind. So the way us human beings are and can be, maybe making it legal is the only way to go right now to protect people, to protect everybody legally, to protect the medical system, etc. Yeah, but I mean, from what the reading and experience that I have about what's been going on in Oregon, it sounds just so humane.
Right.
And, and look at it the other way when you're talking about birth, pro-life or whatever. Most people don't really think much before they have a baby. Most people don't think before they, and my specialty happens to be women's health, so I can tell you that for sure. Most people don't give it a lot of thought before they have children. They just have children. If we can start at the other end by being conscious about how we leave, maybe we could be more conscious about how we come as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Christina. I really appreciate you calling in.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Paul, are you there?
Yes. Am I speaking to Paul? Or
you're speaking to Paul now, yes.
I have done some light, newspaper reading on the subject, and given my age, actually, I'm interested. But my criteria is, how has it worked in Oregon, which is I believe, the state with the longest period of experience in terms. My reading is that it's been used has been used very little in that state.
Yeah, so in Oregon, the interesting thing about Oregon, it's been in place there for 18 years now.
Really?
Yeah. 97, I believe, it was signed into being. What everyone, of course, is worried about is the abuse of the ability to get medications for your mom and then do her in because she owns a house or something. That's what most of the objections from the lawyers' side of things, from the legislation side of things, is about. In Oregon, there have been no documented cases of abuse, apparently.
And it's been used relatively rarely.
Yes, there are far more people have obtained the medication than have used it. I think that's the thing about that is it's a comfort to have it available to you. If you really reach a point where you're desperate enough to do it, or where you feel that your quality of life is sunk to the lowest level you can stand, it's a comfort to have it there. But yes, you're right that it hasn't been used all that much. There was a 29-year-old woman who had terminal brain cancer, Brittany Maynard, who was from California.
Specifically, to be able to take advantage of that law, right?
Right, and that's really what kicked off this big push for this new bill that's trying to go through the California legislature right now. Yeah. So Oregon has been a great success, really.
That's been, my main criteria is, besides the arguments on one side or the other, but how has the law worked?
Right.
That to me is more important than any fine theological points.
Right. I've got figures here, actually. So let's see. I believe 1998 to 2013. It started out with 24 people in 1998, up to 122 people in 2013. So we're getting up into the hundreds now of people who are taking advantage of it. And they're the ones who are actually getting the prescription, not necessarily using it.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay, that's all I wanted to hear. Thank you very much, Paul.
thank you, Paul.
Thanks. We have a doctor on line one. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi, Paul. Gail.
Hi, Gail.
How are you?
Oh, you know.
I apologize because I've been seeing patients, but I just wanted to jump on and be at least a part of the conversation. I haven't really been listening to the whole show. I just listened to the last few minutes. But,
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Gail Ostler. I've been a family practitioner for 30-plus years, and
Yeah.
I just wondered if there was something that I could contribute a little bit more to the conversation from that perspective.
Well, so what, from your point of view, are you, as an MD, are you in favor of allowing physicians to assist by either prescribing medications or being there at the moment when the medications are taken? I know that, what is your view on that?
I think that what's most fascinating about the conversation is that, honestly, I think that this is something that doctors and patients have done privately throughout throughout history,
Right.
really.
Right.
And I don't know that it's maybe there's a little bit that the line has moved back a bit. It was people being, more in a position to choose for themselves. But it's interesting to see something that needs now to be legislated, where there was just a certain level of human compassion and common sense, to know when a person's time was up, really over.
Right.
Because of technology, we have the ability to extend people's lives so much beyond what would actually be considered natural.
Right.
That many times that there are often years of suffering and limitation and decline, because we've used the latest technology, to correct heart problems, and then we've used the latest technology, to treat, major infections and surgeries and, cancers, and on and on. So, I think from a medical perspective, I do think that it should be allowed, and I think that, as you're sort of saying from the experience with Oregon, that it isn't something that's being abused or the people are lining up around the block to use. But I do believe that it gives people the security to know that they won't be left, in a state of disabled
and suffering.
Limitation.
Right. And do you think a part of the reason for the legislation is that the medical healthcare system these days, the doctor's relationship with patients is not what it used to be? I mean, there's so much load on doctors now. They can't, I don't know, do they have the same personal contact that they used to have?
Well, I think that is a very good point. Certainly a person who's been, cared for a family member throughout the course of their life, is in a much better position both to feel the compassion and also to trust it, and be trusted. My dad, my dad developed a dementia when he was in his 80s, and I think he had an insurance policy change, and the doctor who had known him throughout his life as a wonderful, productive, incredible, vital man, was gone, and the person who took care of him saw him only as an elderly, an elderly disabled man. Yeah. And it was very sad for us as a family, and certainly, it was a tremendous loss of that relationship, and it did definitely put everybody in a very different position.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, we have another caller. Thank you, Gail, very much for calling in. That's
very
wonderful.
important conversation, and I'm thrilled that you are here having it and bringing it out for everyone to share.
Thank you so much.
I'll talk to you. We have Robin Carpenter on the phone. Hi, Robin.
Hi, everybody. My question is about how this would actually work legally in terms of, yes, you can go and apply and have your doctor give you the medication, but what happens, how does the law work in terms of something going on privately between the person and their family, or they just decide, I don't want any further treatment, or I have enough here? Do you have to be within the system the way the law, say, works in Oregon, do you have to be within the system to be protected from prosecution, or can it be something that comes up? I mean, we had this happen with friends of ours whose mother had a DNR, and she was on hospice palliative care at home, and her heart started to going into failure. The hospice visiting nurse that day, we couldn't find the order, and so our friend's mother, that she was going to have to be forced to call the ambulance, and so we knew, and she knew, that if we gave her certain relaxing medications that we already had on hand with what was going on with her heart, she would leave sooner rather than later and not be taken by the ambulance.
Yeah.
So this was a decision that was made over the course of an hour, and she was lucid enough to agree and know, and she was feeling a lot of pain and anxiety and said, I'm really ready. I do not want to go to the hospital again.
Yeah, right.
So let's do this. So that's one of my questions is, does this also then lift the burden for other decisions made outside the system, or does this just put it on a systemic track to change the law?
Well, the law itself, I would think, would just be for working within the system. I mean, it's setting up a system, basically. It's setting up a legal avenue for receiving care, final care, and being able to receive prescription medications that will do you in, basically, right? Yeah, outside, as you said, you had medications on hand. This is, of course, what a lot of people do, is they hoard medications secretly so that they can make the choice when they have to. And that's part of the reason for the legislation, I guess, is that it actually gives people a legal option that they can get up-to-date drugs and drugs that are actually going to do the job efficiently when you need to. That's what we're hearing, though, from both medical professionals who've called in, is that doctors have always done this. So thank you, Robin.
You're listening to Let's Talk Radio with your co-hosts Paul Reffell, Bernie Stephan, and I'm Raven Gray. We're asking the question, should we be able to legally choose the time of our death? Please tell us what you are thinking by calling 415-663-8492.
Carla, you're on the air. Are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great.
So my experience, I've lost my father and my brother, was able to be there at the bedside because of hospice. Yeah. So I'm thinking, Paul, of your circumstances. You fell through the cracks because Donna didn't qualify for hospice. There wasn't a physician, blah, blah, blah. So you were deprived of your right to be with her because you were a conscionable person and did not want to go afoul. Well, I'm thinking of it from a slightly different perspective. Why can't there be the sacred trust between physician and patient? That is to say, not necessarily above the law, but what is decided between them has more precedence. We have been so co-opted because of the insurance company regulations, and doctors no longer have the kind of freedom to make choices that they seem to have in the past. They seem to be, a friend of mine recently said, I feel that I am practicing fast food medicine because I only have 15 minutes. I need 60 minutes to do a proper business with my patient. So because of those circumstances, I was thinking that we might inquire if we could not give doctors back more power and to make decisions. And I want people who are in your circumstances to be able to have that choice, that people need the freedom to be able to die at home with their loved ones no matter what. So somehow, if we're talking about legislation, I would like to see those circumstances put in place.
Yeah, and the system is a dehumanizing one as much as it is about healthcare. It's there's less contact, there's less human contact between physicians, especially in HMOs. Donna was part of Kaiser, but also, fortunately, was part of the local clinic here. So she was able to get wonderful care here, personal care. Everyone loved her here. And,
right. No, I don't mean care. Of course, that was available, but you were still not able to be with her.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's what needs to be addressed.
Right.
That everyone should be able to do that.
So, of course, it can be done, but you have to do it so secretly. She didn't want any chance of me getting into trouble.
Of course, she was taking very good care of you.
But there are, we've heard of instances. Mark Dowie did a fabulous online radio show about this subject, about a family that was gathered around, and they did the helium with the plastic bag over the head trick, and how actually wonderful it was to have all the family and friends around them. But of course, it was totally illegal.
Well, that's what needs to be addressed, and I think that that's the basis of concern. I'm also. I don't know exactly where that legalization should come from, but I would like to see people's rights returned, that we are not so governed by restrictions that are not in our best interest.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's about it.
Thank you very much for calling in.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. So the part of the deal, part of the preparations is having advanced healthcare directives, and there's a organization, Compassion and Choices. They have a website, compassionandchoices.org, who actually have something called the Good to Go Toolkit, which is pretty good. And it has very detailed directives about how someone actually wants to pass, and not just whether they can be unplugged. And Compassion and Choices is a great, very useful website, and they are the ones who are really pushing for the law to go through the legislature. On the other hand, there are, of course, for example, in Britain, they're still talking about passing laws there that would address this issue, and of course there the Church of England is the big religious power, and they are completely against it. That it would damage society is what one of the headlines I'm looking at right here. And so that's, where do you draw the line between the sanctity of life and personal choice, which, does God want to put us through suffering to make our souls stronger or something? That's kind of one argument against it. And we have a caller.
Ironically here, you were mentioning Mark Dowie, and through the greatness of this live local radio program, we have Mark Dowie on the line. You're in the air, Mark.
Hi.
Hi. Are you in Canada, or have you returned?
No, I'm back. I'm back from Canada. I'm right across the bay.
Yeah, so I was just mentioning, we're talking about end-of-life options, and I just mentioned that you had this wonderful show that you did online about a family that took the course of assisted dying with the patriarch of the family. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, and KWMR has aired this program twice.
That's right.
Look at that.
Yeah, it was a 1-hour radio documentary I did about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's gotten a lot of, and every time this issue comes up, it gets a lot more airtime. It's on PRX.
Oh yeah, give a plug. Give a.
Yeah, PRX is the sort of the people's radio syndicate. It's got a lot of good programs, including Reveal, which KWMR is now airing.
Yeah, and another good show.
Yeah.
So when you did that show, you also had a lawyer, I believe, and a doctor who were arguing against it. What were the arguments that they had against it?
Well, I had a lot of people arguing against it. It was a balanced show, and I wanted all the voices spoken. There were disabled people on the show who were opposed to it. Some of the arguments against it I find are quite compelling. Mm-hmm. But what they're arguing against is assisted suicide. And I would never, ever assist a suicide. Suicide is a choice between living and dying. hastening death is a decision that doesn't have a choice between living and dying. You are dying. So aid in dying, which is really what we're talking about and really what the California legislation is all about, is for people who are dying, not for people who have a chance at life. The goal of these people is to die, and to die with dignity, and to die a pain-free life. And I think not to assist somebody who's in that situation and is facing a horrible death, like with ALS or cortical basal degeneration or Lewy body disorder, or some of these really, really
awful
terminal diseases that have horrible, horrible end games, is really inhumane not to assist them, I think, and not to give them an easy path to the inevitable death that they're facing. So my thing is to get the S word out of this whole dialogue, which the opposition keeps bringing up, keep calling this assisted suicide when it isn't suicide at all. This is no kind of suicide.
Yeah, we need another single word to describe it, perhaps.
Well, hastening death is fine with me, or aid in dying.
Yeah, right.
Which are the words that people like Compassionate Choices use. And, and even the more radical organizations like Final Exit do not use the S word. It throws the whole debate into a morass of misunderstanding.
Yeah, I think that's it's a very evocative word, and right. Thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bye.
This is Raven Gray. I was just going to add my 2 cents for the record, and I'm not really sure how adamant I am on, I'm not really clear on this issue, and I want to say that I didn't really think about it at all until my father died a few months ago. And I found out after he died that he actually tried to commit suicide in October last year. Then he spent a week in psychiatric care, and eventually he died a few months later. And I have good reason to believe that his death was assisted suicide, or at least assisted, and that he may not have actually been complicit or compos mentis in that decision. By that I mean he was assisted by other people's interests rather than his own. And now my dad had cancer, and he had it for 15 years, but that's not what killed him. He suffered from mental health issues for many years, particularly depression, and in fact his own father committed suicide when I was a young child. The terrible truth is that my dad's death was disempowering, ugly, and undignified. And yes, he was in a lot of pain, and towards his later years he didn't really have much quality of life, I know that. But I also can't help wondering about the other coercive pressures that he was under. He worried about money. He felt, his ongoing medical care costs were busting his bank. And he felt that he was a burden, particularly on his wife, my stepmother, who was his primary caretaker. And for these reasons, I believe that my dad was forced into leaving before his time, and that he was not really in a fit mind to make a decision to end his own life. And to me, that it's not a clear-cut issue, is it? It's very complex, case by case. Obviously, all patients have a right to refuse treatment and receive palliative care that reduce their suffering. And in some cases, this may hasten their death. And I think that's okay. But assisted suicide puts a lot of power into the hands of physicians and other people. And I just want to raise a few more issues, if I'm not talking too much,
No, that's great.
To say that... in the case of my dad, when is it a rational decision? How do we know when someone's suffering from an underlying mental health problem? How do we determine if it's depression, which is maybe treatable? How do we know if they're making a decision from a good place? And what if the prognosis is wrong? Like if it's somebody in their 80s or 90s, sure, that's the end of their life. But sometimes I listened to this NPR show on physician-assisted suicide, and one of the speakers said that 50% of the time, end-of-life prognosis are actually wrong. And a person my dad was told he had a year to live, and he lived for 15 more years. And so how do we know that the person isn't under pressure, feeling like a burden to those they love, or that their life insurance is about to expire? And one more thing is that we live in a culture that values beauty, youth, health, and independence above all else. So when maybe we just need to help the terminally ill to realize that they do have value and worth, even if they're not pretty or they're not young or they're unproductive, or they're very dependent. Maybe it's the quality of end-of-life care that needs improving, and not, Anyway, I don't know. I have a lot more to say, but, death and dying is really beyond our understanding. So I just don't know. Do we really know what we're doing? It's a very interesting...
Yeah, and one of the big reasons that people decide to do away with themselves in whatever way is that they are a burden, financial or emotional, or, that
yes.
they're, is that a rational... Is that a rational decision to take your own life if it's about being a burden? If you're still able to talk and think, what is that threshold that makes it okay to do that?
And we have a caller. Kathy, you're on the air.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people know that it is coming up for the State Assembly is going to be voting or discussing the bill on September 11th. And if the bill is approved, I think it means that that the legislation will be enacted. So if you care about this bill, it's a good time to write or call your assemblyman.
Thank you for that. Yes, it is definitely coming up. Out here in West Marin, our representatives in the state are actively pushing the bill, actually. So in some people's eyes, that would be a fortunate thing.
And I also just want to say, for those of us who love dogs, I had three dogs put down, and it was obviously very difficult, but it was also a very beautiful situation where they were let go.
Yeah, out of their pain, right?
So, yes, we take better care of our dogs than we do of humans sometimes.
Right.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So that's interesting point. That what is that cutoff point? What makes it okay to? How do we know that someone who is already on pain-killing drugs and all that is of sound mind enough to make that decision? It's
a tricky question.
Yeah.
However, like a lot of callers have pointed out, now we have so much technology that it's a harder line to draw than it used to be. And I just want to pay tribute to those people who face death and recognize this is a time now that is important for talking to loved ones and saying goodbye. And I so appreciate that because I feel my own parents, it was always this anxiety about the medical thing, and we never really had that time where you sit and you talk.
Which is very real pressure, right? I mean, it's a rational decision that maybe people have to make. It's like, can we afford to have children? Can I afford to stick around? I don't know. It's certainly an emotional burden for everyone involved. I know that I was looking after Donna for at least 3 years, 24/7, and we witnessed her deterioration, and she knew it was coming, and she knew that once she couldn't figure out how to use the telephone anymore, that it was probably not long. So of course it's a real conundrum. There are many lines that have to be crossed to say that it's okay, but and each case is different, of course. Yeah, so there, as I was saying, Compassion and Choice is a good website to go on. Of course, they're pushing the agenda, and their agenda is to definitely get this legislation passed, and beyond that, and to give advice to those who are pushed to the edge of wanting to do this.
I'm sorry, I screwed up. Hang on.
Whether the decision is
Robin, you're back on the air.
Thanks. It's Robin again.
I
wanted to follow up quickly to what Raven had said, because I've had two different situations within my family. One in which a family member who was very invested in the person leaving when they were not ready to go, and waited actually for a doctor shift and manipulated the system. And another in which a family member who's 89 and very vibrant, but he's in the VA system, and they're starting to want to deny certain procedures to him that would normally be given to someone who was 65 or 70. They even tried to talk him into a do not resuscitate, and he's like, no. And he had a heart attack. They resuscitated, and he's, home mowing the lawn. So, but because he's 89, it's like he's not an investable property, so to speak. So I think this is a little off topic, but I think it's an excellent topic for you guys to consider in the future about a lot of what's going on, and I think that's what creates some fear in people about how much care you get when you're investability, and are they going to get return on investment when you're past a certain age? And how important is it that we get to have this person in our lives that we love for another year or two? It's pretty invaluable to us. So, those kinds of questions, too, I think are what also make people a little bit goosey and would maybe be a great second topic. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks, Raven, for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. Yeah, well, it's all intertwined in this subject, isn't it? I mean, it's, yes, we all want loved ones to be around as long as they can be around. And, when that decision gets made, we hope it's a decision made by the patient, the one who's actually going to. Yeah, there is definitely the possibility of abuse, as Raven was saying. It may have not been her father's actual choice. That's what you were saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that others made the decision for him, or talked him into it, right? Coerced, you said.
Coerced, I would say, yes.
Yeah, right.
Not talked him into it.
Right.
But pushed him over the edge, eased his passage, if you like, which is, a shocking thing and disturbing. I mean, I have some other, concerns. I don't know where the line is between, euthanasia, assisted suicide. I mean, what about the people who are not autonomous? What about the, infants or, young children or the unconscious, the demented, the very elderly? Like, who has the right to make the choice to end their life? And it's a bit of a slippery slope, isn't it? I mean...
Well, the only person who has the right to choose is the person who's going to do it. That would be my...
So would assisted suicide have those regulations in place that they would not apply to people under the age of 18, for example?
Oh, well, that's interesting. I don't know if that's actually in the law. I'm not sure.
Or if you have a mental disorder or you have dementia.
It's really about terminal patients. It's still not including necessarily people who are in abject pain and yet they do not have a terminal disease, So, and it's terminal patients, adults, I'm guessing. I'm sure that's in there somewhere. And people who are of sound mind, whatever that means, So the ones who are already in deep dementia, they would not have that option. It would be the same system that exists now, which is, palliative care and gradually turning up the drip and easing them off, or keeping them alive for as long as you can, and so that the nursing home still gets its monthly little input.
Yeah, well, the whole nursing home scene is not a very pretty one either, because that can vary greatly to people that are getting tremendous care and other people just being warehoused. And
right.
Yes, we've got a very complicated situation in our society. I think what I believe the law hopefully will pass and be as broad as possible will help is, even though, as the doctor said earlier, Gail, that this goes on despite the law, that those like yourself might not feel as at risk, so that you can be more just open and honest and deal with the situation on a human level, not on a legal level.
Right, on a human level, yeah, exactly. That option is always there, but it always right now has to be undercover if.
We have another caller. Cynthia, you're on the air.
Cynthia.
Hi, Paul.
Hey.
I have to admit I wasn't able to listen to any of the program because I've been in with a patient.
He's a hospice nurse.
Yeah, I'm a hospice nurse. I'm not speaking for any hospice, and I don't know if this was covered at all, but what I want to add is that in my work with people who are dying is that on some level, most of them choose when to die anyhow, whether it's with assistance of any kind or without. There's some way that they do make a decision. And what I also want to add is that when people make a decision, there are ways they can do that without assistance.
Sure.
There was a very well-known member of the West Marin community who several years ago was my patient, who said, "It's time, I want to go, and I'm going to stop eating and drinking." Mm-hmm. And, her friends weren't so happy about it. She was in her 90s. She said she felt people are either in too much pain or they're too tired, one or the other. Mm. And in fact, yes, she stopped eating, which you can not eat for a long time and still be alive, but a person has to have liquid in order to survive. Mm. And after a few days, no liquids, she passed. And you could say, was it assisted or not assisted? She made the decision. Mm. And I just want people to know that there are many ways to have control over whether their bodies are uncomfortable or not.
Yeah, and you're actually saying that the body and the mind know when it's time anyway, right? I mean, you see...
Absolutely, because what I see, and I've been doing this work for a long time, is that most of the time people pass when the people that particularly their children, are not in the room. And they will wait until everybody else goes or falls asleep to take that last breath, because it's very difficult to let go when the people you love are right there. Even if you think that person's been non-responsive for days, they still have some sense of what's around them. Otherwise, it would be more random, but most of the time, they wait till everybody's gone. I even had a situation with a caregiver who was very attached to her patient. All of the patient's children went home for the night. We knew she was going to die that night. And the caregiver said, "Well, I'm going to stay in with her." And I said, "Well, she may not be able to go with you in the room." Mm-hmm. She said, "Well, I'm staying with her." Well, she stayed up with her until 5:30 in the morning. And then she finally went to bed, and bingo, the patient died. And I see this all the time. I mean, so many times people come back to me later and say, "Well, it happened just the way you said. My mother waited until I went to the bathroom." Things like that.
Well, Cynthia, thank you so much for calling in. That's a beautiful insight into this. And we're going to go off the air right now pretty soon. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who called in. What a fabulous premiere show. And next week...
Yeah, our topic will be our global predicaments. We're going to ask the question, what frustrates you most about what's happening on our planet? What's happening to our human species here?
Well, I hope you'll tune in every Thursday at 11 a.m. because your voice really does matter. This has been Let's Talk with co-hosts Paul Reffell, Bernie Stephan, and I'm Raven Gray.